Hi, everybody. This is On, and I'm coming to you with this month's Connecting Codes video, getting ready to share what's going to happen in June. And are you ready for what's going to get activated? Hold on, it's kind of a wild ride out there. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. This video is getting filmed kind of early, so I'm sure there's going to be stuff coming up between the time I filmed it and the time the information goes out. I just have a lot that's happening in May, and so with that being said, I've had to film early. I've had to film early on June, but that's okay because that's kind of the cool thing with the codes. I don't have to wait and start and see what's happening in the world itself before I make a video because the energies are the energies, and that's not going to change either way. So, um, eh, looking forward to sharing with you what's going down in June. For those of you that don't know, I am the author of this book, The Code Journey. Try to get that up in there. And anyways, every year I put out a new edition of this, and it's huge. It's thick. It's like 700 pages in here, and it's a book that I put out that gives the insights for what's going on for the year. I call it like a spiritual almanac, but obviously it's going to tune into some world event things and clients I have, even though a lot of my clients are religious or spiritual or practicing all different actually kind of beliefs in the world. Um, uh, it really is a way of helping us to live more compassionately as a society, as a culture, but being aware and alert because even when we're spiritual people, we can't ignore the things that are happening in our world events and our world level. The key is how do we deal with them? And hopefully this addresses, both of those in many ways and looks into it. And so this breaks it down by the year, the months, the days, things that we can work on personally in our lives, ways that we can approach things with some foresight, not projection, but foresight. So if we understand about the currents that are available, that are present, then we can work with that. We can make wise choices. We can prepare ourselves in different ways. We're never going to know all of the exact specifics, no matter what we know in things. But this is information that comes from a blend of over 50 different modalities, none of which are used in the traditional ways. And when I'm doing this, it really is about not just going through the world, not just, an astrology tool or something like that, but it's that tool that hopefully brings people back into a God-centered life or a compassionate-centered life or, divine source-centered life, depending on your belief system, and gets people really working from the essence of what we are, that soul energy, that divine energy, and being alert and aware. Because if you're doing soul work here, if you're doing spiritual work here, if you're doing religious work here, whatever the work is that you're doing here, whatever your reason is for being on this planet at this time, um, there's a lot of pieces that we still want to be aware of. We want to be aware and alert to what's happening because if we know that a lot of hate is being stirred up in the world, then we can take measures to increase love in the world. We always have options and opportunities available. When we don't like something, if we, if I don't like abusive tendencies, if I don't like mistreatment of people, then I can do things to treat people kindly. And I get that there's a lot of people out there in the world that will say, oh, but you've got to take sides and you've got to join this fight and you've got to do this and you've got to do. Actually, nobody has to do anything, you know, and we're going to deal with the consequences accordingly. I choose to make my alignment with God, with divine source, first and foremost, outside of any religion, belief system, political system, or anything else. That is where my alignment lies. It's in values, it's in ethics, it's in divine principles, and everything can come around through those things. Now, that being said, does that mean I agree with allowing crime to run rampant and women to be raped and pillaged and, all of those things? No, I don't agree with that at all. Um, there are things about living in this world that we have to have. But it also means that I look at the deeper layers of things, and I'm not just going to allow myself to be swept up in whatever the current political narrative is. So these videos, I actually had requests from people that were in my sphere that were clients of mine, and they said, I'd really like you to address what's going on in the world. And it's kind of funny because, they say what you avoid is what you get thrust into. Well, politics has always been that thing I've tried to avoid, really, but I've been thrust into it, so I have to embrace it and move my way through it and find a way to bring in the wisdom and bring in the lessons. It's like the priest down in Australia, in the Sydney area, that was stabbed, and what does he do? He comes back and he says, "I have forgiveness for you." He is showing the world an amazing way of handling things. And, just because he has forgiveness, just because he says, I will pray for you or whatever else, um, doesn't mean that he doesn't want the person held accountable, because part of his belief is that, yeah, we can't allow this to be happening in the world. But he's such a beautiful example of that more peaceful path, that truly, I would say, God path in a way, viewing things through God's eyes and realizing all of these different layers. And he is practicing what he preaches. And I always have an enormous amount of respect for those people who practice what they preach, as opposed to just saying things and then never having an experience or understanding them firsthand. And I think that's what's gotten me through a lot of things, or earned a lot of respect from people, is because when I speak about something, it's usually because I have some sort of personal experience with it. I've been through the hardships, I've been through the fire over and over again, still going through the fire. And I think this world has a lot of fire in it for us to go through. But that's okay, because we were called down here to make the shifts and make the transformations. And if we're not willing to look at the truth, and we're not willing to really understand the things that are happening in our world and how different people are functioning in the world, we can't make those changes, honestly. You know, if if I don't understand how ingredients mix together in a kitchen, I'm never really going to be able to cook. I mean, sure, I can go get a pre-made mix and add some water or something, but until I really understand the way the oven works, where I live in my climate and my temperature settings, and the ingredients I have available, and how one type of flour might be give a whole different flavor than another type of flour or whatever. I mean, until I get in the kitchen and cook, I'm not going to understand cooking. And the same is true of anything in our life. Until we get into it, we're not going to understand it. We're not going to understand what it's like. We're not going to truly understand the challenges. We can have sympathy, we can have compassion, we can have empathy, we can visualize it, but we're not actually in it. So uh, that is always an interesting piece here. So, anyways, really, are you ready? You know, that's this month's topic. Are you ready for things to get activated? Because we're going to have stuff activated in June, and it's not always going to be easy. And people say, well, some of these things, it seems like you're bringing up some of the same stuff over and over again, and that's because we do have a lot of stuff that repeats over and over again. The way agendas work in our world, they repeat the same processes, the same playbook over and over and over again. So and when we look at energetic currents and energetic patterns in the world and how those play out, they cycle. So, you might have a cycle, and there's always a little piece that's dropping off and another piece that's coming in, that's new to dynamic, but you got this whole center part that is, you know, repeating itself over and over again. And so this is why we have these eras and these generations where certain characteristics and traits and qualities and values are big and in motion and active. And then you get into another one and it shifts and you have a different emphasis that's going on in life. And so a lot of these things do cycle and they do come up and down, like we're in times that are turbulent times. The energetic patterns are that, and it's going to stay with us for a long time. The weather patterns, now some parts of that may be because there's interference and man trying to think it can control the weather and those sorts of things. And then you have other points where it's just Mother Nature trying to balance itself. But the interaction of the other currents that are involved help us to understand that. And they help us to understand which part it is. So I have a gift for understanding how the patterns are, what they are, how they interact. And so this is all kind of original work. I don't pull off of Intel. I don't pull off of anybody else's sites. It is my unique way of seeing things, I guess. Nothing is 100% new, obviously, but a lot of the things that are out there in the world, too, are just programmed. We believe that they're good or bad based on the programming that we've been given or the marketing around them that made them that way. And so, that's why a lot of people pick stuff up and they say, well, oh, this is the absolute truth. Well, it's kind of somebody's system. And even this, what I do to an extent is really my system. But again, I'm embracing a gift I have to understand the currents and see. And so I'm never going to tell you, okay, I may give you some general dates of what, then explain the currents within those dates, but I'm never going to say, on May 5th, so and so is going to take this exact move at this time of day. And if you have people saying that, they're probably not telling you the truth. They're probably working clickbaiting. They're probably in a network of people that are promoting narratives or counter narratives or things like that. So just, be aware of those. And I find that, if you find somebody's information interesting, valuable, or truthful to you, then great. And if you don't, then don't listen to them. you know, that's the way it is. There's a lot of different styles and personalities and methods out there for seeing things, and people are looking at different things. And I have people frequently come to me and saying, well, what about these components? All the astrologers are talking about that. And I'm like, great, it's astrology. Let the astrologers talk about astrology. I have an astrology background, but I can't begin to look at every single component that is in motion. So I have to pull the main components of things. And there's just not enough hours in the time for me to put out a book like this, and the link to my website's in the notes, but every year, and do some of the things that the other people are. That's why they specialize in what they specialize in, because they want to get into all those nitty-gritty details of their art, so to say, in there. So, fine, great. They'll bring up some perspectives I won't bring up, and that's okay. That's okay. You can take what works for you and toss out what doesn't work for you. That's all fine in there. But let's get on into June. And one of the things about June is, much like May, we have a lot of this past energy resurfacing in June. And so the past is coming back up. And why does the past come up? It comes up because we need to deal with it. We need to maybe take a different approach. We need to see how things are different now from when they were implemented before, or things like that. But it also is showing us, look, these are the things that are going to bubble up to the surface. These are the things that we need to be dealing with right now. If we haven't dealt with something well in the past, or completely closed it out, or laid it to rest fully, it is going to keep resurfacing over and over and over again. And we can see different components. I talked about the different components in last month's video that were surfacing up in May. And now, we have some different components that are coming into play in June, as far as our past influences come up. And when these past influences come up, we really want to look at what's different, what's changed, who was I when they happened, and you can't necessarily do that if you didn't, exist 200 years ago. Um, and how has culture, changed since this happened 200 years ago? What's the mindset? Is it different? Is it the same? Are people believing the same um stories or information that they did before? Have we evolved? Will we not fall for that? What do we have that we didn't have back then? And what did we have back then that we don't have now? And it doesn't make one necessarily better or the other, because when you really look back in time and history, what happens is that we have a lot of stuff that was very evolved in ancient technologies before any technology per se was developed, before you had electricity and before you had um, AI and computerized stuff going on and all of these things. I mean, the techniques that were used in ancient civilizations were incredible. Working with sound, working with vibration, which are all divine tools, not man-made tools, really divine, drawing on the inner um, wellspring of divine energy to create those. And you had to carry a pretty strong faith and divine alignment to, move massive boulders by sound and vibration. So there was a lot more connection there. So we can't necessarily discard those things as primitive techniques, because there's a lot of primitive techniques out there that are actually far more advanced than all of this computerized technology stuff that we have today in there. And so that's another reason too, to relook at that and to show us where we've gotten off track, where we're still on track, what can we do with it? And I think that's a big part of it. So as we get into what's parts of the past are resurfacing in June, where is history repeating itself? That's what we're going to look at with, when this is a world events video as opposed to a personal video. In world events where history is repeating itself, we see women's rights and anti-slavery activists coming into the forefront. Now, we already had last month in May, because we talked about the resurgence of things with Nelson Mandela and the current leader down there, both being these kind of anti-apartheid um, leaders, and of course Nelson Mandela being the first Black African leader down there in there. So when we start to look at that, we're going to have some continuation of this so-called anti-slavery movement, the movements towards reparations coming up, things like that. And this is where it gets very distorted, because you've got people, they want to make it whatever fits and benefits them as opposed to what it was. And the problem is a lot of people try to look at things through their current eyes versus the eyes of those times. So, slavery is one of those very touchy things, and especially with America and founding fathers and things like that. And on one hand, they want to praise the founding fathers. On the other hand, they want to say, well, they were a bunch of, white, whatever, supremacists, slave owners. And, as somebody who is a descendant of George Washington, not defending one way or another, I'm just saying there's a lot of variables in there that the way some of the slavery movements were, they weren't really about slavery. They weren't holding people captive. Now, did they, were some of them taken? Yes. Against their will? I would say yes. And then yes, and in a certain extent from that aspect, you are talking slavery. On other aspects, there were a lot of them that came over very, very willingly. They were not held against their will. They came over as part of a work program to help develop America. And the promise was, if you're willing to work, if you're willing to do these things, we will be given shelter, you will be given food, and you will be given a certain amount of pay. And after a certain amount of time, you will be given a stipend. You can go out and you can branch on your own. Now, those who were like George Washington, they actually kept their slaves in very good conditions. There were times the slaves were allowed in the house. They weren't completely excluded like they were in other areas. They had components where um, they honored that work agreement, and that's really what it was. It was a work agreement in there. But you get into some of the areas deeper into the South and deeper into the areas where you had a heavier KKK influence in there. And then you did have more of a white supremacy movement. And the slaves were, in some cases, not all of them, but in some cases, very poorly treated. And they were held more as captives. They were not given the things that they were promised. They were given poor living conditions and all of these things, which is why you saw this whole movement right out of there from the tunnels and escaping and all of those things, because once their agreement came to an end, they weren't freed. And so you can't just look at it from one perspective and say, well, everybody who had, an African American or whatever culture on their property working for them, was this abusive white supremacy slave owner. That's actually not the case. Um, so, very big differences. And this is what happens when we talk about world events and all this information starts to come out, is that people only want to look at things from one perspective, and they don't want to look at the whole scale of what happened. And this is true. Like when we talk about wars and stuff like that, we talk about cultures, and they want us to hate a particular culture or a particular country. Well, a lot of those people in the country are beautiful, wonderful people that, they're not the problem, and they shouldn't be lumped in with the people who are, being abusive and mistreating. And that's why we have to get past the grouping, of things, and we have to look at it and say, no, what we want to stand up to is the corruption. We want to stand up to these things, as opposed to, um, we want to stand up for values, and we want to stand up to the crimes being committed. And that is not attached necessarily to one particular person, culture, country, or anything like that. Because I know people in many different countries, and there's a lot of wonderful people out there, and they don't necessarily agree with what their leaders are doing, or things like that, but they get lumped in like, oh, you're from that part, of the world. Well, we just hate you because you're from that part of the world. And we don't want to be in that mindset, because that's not going to benefit any of us anywhere once we get into that thinking in there. So June's going to be a big month. Women's rights, anti-slavery activists coming out of the woodwork. Um, this is very, very interesting, I find, too, because of where we're seeing, like in America, the shift in our voters, particularly in different cultures, particularly the African American culture, particularly people of different ethnicities, and where they're shifting and how they're shifting their votes and what's coming out. And I think, as we again see this perpetuation of people who have, say, maybe promised immigrants coming in certain things, and then they're going to cut those immigrants off, or they're not going to get it. And we already saw this. Was it DC or New York? I can't remember which. Um, and then the immigrants were like, hey, you promised us all this stuff, and if you're not going to give it to us, we're going to start tearing stuff down. So we're going to see some of this backfiring, and that is a repeating of some of the slavery movements, right? Again, you got two very different things that happened in the slavery movements, almost opposite aspects, one that really was slavery and one that was a work program. And it's important to know that they weren't all just one thing. Um, and the same thing is happening. The same people that broke the promises, so to say, years ago, the same groupings of people are the same ones that are doing it now. And so it's going to be very, very interesting to see that come up. I think also June is going to be interesting. It's going to be bringing out some pieces that are some sort of new communications. We have energy patterns related to new communications or new inventions coming out. Of course, by the time it comes out into the public, they've already been working with it for, anywhere from 5 to 50 years, probably, or longer. Right? We see that. I mean, we've got technology that we're seeing here and now today they started using it 100 years ago. So it's not really necessarily new, but it's new for public usage. It's new to have in the hands of maybe the everyday person, things like that. And we do have a lot of AI innovations coming out. You know, we have the laser dogs were just put out, and we've got, you know, these developments in AI that is just self-functioning in a lot of ways. We've got self-driving cars. I mean, who would have thought that? We've got hover vehicles that are being released. We've got a lot of things out there really, with these different inventions. So it's going to be interesting. What is the new communications, though? It's very specifically connected to communications. So that makes me wonder, um, even though we've had all of this satellite technology and things like that, maybe we're going to do something that's more connected to, there will be more coming out as far as like maybe satellite cell phones or something like that, as opposed to towers that we use now. And that something like that could be a possibility. They've been working on that for quite a while, but that might hit a little more mainstream. That could be something that might be released. So we'll have to see what those innovations are. Um, you know, again, I don't get the exact specifics. I'm not drawing from somebody's BS intel somewhere. Um, but definitely we see that a connection there, communication inventions. Um, Paris, I think things are going to come up in Paris. That's one of the things I'm drawing on, is that we may see things that actually um, come up in Paris, and we've got, oh, I can't think of his name right at the top of my head, that's out there. Um, Macron, I guess it is Macron, because he's the leader of France, um, coming up and literally probably going out, and we might see some shootings happening where people are not conforming. And we could see people who are working for the government, military, um, uh, shoot those people who are nonconformist, and that would be around the Paris area, or in Paris. So if any of you are out in that direction, I would be very, very careful about that time during June. If you are not conforming to Macron's desires and wills and structures and all of that, I think that's going to be a harsh awakening for people, because that is crossing new lines with the criminal syndicates, the corruption that we have in our political structures. That would be crossing whole new lines to just blatantly go out and shoot people who disagree with you. Um, and that's not even just criminals being hired to do that. That's not even hired thugs necessarily. I mean, it will be flat out blatant that that's what's happening. And that ties in where in May I talked about, you know, the tyranny coming up and the communist structures coming up in things, the dictatorial structures coming up. And, you know, if they finish out May, if Macron, for example, finishes out May feeling very insecure in his power, he could turn to something like that. He could go extremist. And we know the closer that things get to our US elections, um, the more extremist some of these leaders are going to get, the more paranoid they're going to get, the more panic they're going to get with things. So we want to keep our eyes on that, again, because I think that's going to be a huge eye opening, and it's going to be a huge thing that's going to make people rethink some stuff in there. I think another thing that's going to come back into the surface one way or another is Robert Kennedy's assassination is going to come back up into the limelight, and that is going to shed some light. I think that is going to be done maybe to get people researching it again, get people understanding it again. We know that was an inside FBI initiative. There's a lot of things at least indicating that. Of course, obviously the FBI isn't going to agree to that. The people involved in it aren't going to say that they're guilty. You know, the criminals don't claim their crimes in there. And so I think there's going to be a lot coming up for that. And it's very interesting because just, you know, here at the end of April, uh, uh, the Kennedys were coming out supporting Biden as their candidate, even though Robert Kennedy Jr. is running for president under an independent ticket here in the United States. So, and they didn't want to give him Secret Service protection as a presidential candidate. So, does that mean that we are going to see either more things come out about the Kennedy assassinations, or are we going to see an attempt of assassination on Robert Kennedy Jr.? Or are we going to see a Robert Kennedy type of assassination or assassination attempt made, which, we already have enough political leaders calling for that on Trump. So that is going to be an interesting thing to see what happens, but that energy is in the air, and we do know that Trump has some connections in there. Had connections with John Kennedy, and of course, there's that opens a whole realm of things and other narratives that I'm not really going to get into because that's just going to trigger a whole bunch of stuff. But I mean, I think somewhere we're going to see that connection come up in June, and it's gonna rock some waves. It's gonna open some doors up. It's going to shine some pretty big lights on things, and I think it's going to make people aware that there's definitely some things connected to that are either more extreme or not understood or covered or hidden. And that could open a whole realm of things of how there's been government cover-ups for things, and how they, had fall people, and the actual shooters were not the people who were accused of the crimes. And we could have more of that coming up too, that, that coming more out into the mainstream public awareness of things. Also coming up in our past connections is D-Day invasion. And that was designed to liberate Normandy from German occupied land. And it was a seaborne invasion. So when I look at that, that does seem like it could definitely have some connections with what might surface, given all of the different war energy that is present and going on. And an aspect of a seaborne invasion to German occupied land, I think could be an interesting piece, because remember, last month we had, what was it? We had Germany. Let me see if I can find my notes really quick. We had Germany involved in something. We had Germany involved in attacking somebody else last month. So there could be a play happening around that that would be going on. And again, the seaborne invasion, I think there's something about the seaborne invasion that is going to be a connection in there. So we may see more of that type of invasion, or a D-Day type of invasion. It may not be specifically Germany, but we may see similar types of invasions coming back up again. And then we have energy around this time. There was a point in our history that connects with the Pope having committed possible suicide or may commit suicide due to becoming an enemy of the state. And this is one of our historical pieces that connects in with the month of June. And I find that very interesting because, as we know, that, I mean, that's kind of like that's kind of like saying, how convenient that somebody who had a beef with the Clintons or whatever, whoever it is, just decided to commit suicide. I mean, it's kind of an odd thing, and I think that could be one of those shockers that would come up that maybe people weren't expecting. But we do know that there has been a lot of corruption in the Catholic Church or at least in the Roman Empire energy, the Pope energy. And that could definitely be something that we might see. I don't know if that's definite. My gut is not, it's not fully strong in there, but I think maybe there's attempts to look like that. Maybe there's rumors about it. Maybe there's other things, but it will be very interesting to see is, is the Pope, because a lot of people put a lot of faith in the Pope, right? They hold the Pope in a lot of reference in there. And so, when you consider that component, if the Pope has a change of direction, especially if they're in the Vatican, which has got huge historical Roman corruption energy in it, there are these possibilities. There are these possibilities there. And again, if that was to come out in the news and somebody said, "Oh, Pope Francis committed suicide" or something like that, then I I would be suspicious. I'd be suspicious whether it was a true suicide, honestly, because, if you're an enemy of the state, of the government, of the corruption, um, most of the time it's not a suicide. That's all I'm going to say. Most of the time it's not. So it will be interesting to see what plays out of that. In historical times, the Greeks infiltrated Troy, which is Turkey area. That was the whole Trojan horse history component. And then the key person behind that went in and stole the wife of the leader in Troy. And what this shows me when I make that connection there is there's a couple of things. Again, it's going to show the huge infiltration, people appearing to be one thing and being something else. And we're seeing a lot of this, right, where Democrats are going in and registering as Republicans and trying to take Republican seats in the House and the Senate and different things like that, just so that they can have total rule over everything. That's a Trojan horse component. Somebody who appears to be a friend, an inside stronghold, and then they turn out to be basically a traitor in there. The other thing that we are likely to see under this energy pattern of the history resurfacing is republics coming under attack. So that means the United States. That means our Constitution. That means any country who operates under a republic is probably going to come under attack. And a Republican style constitution or anything similar to that, like we have here in the United States, will come under attack. So we can expect a huge attack on the Constitution. And why? Because those people who are not very nice people would like to wipe out our Constitution. They would like to get rid of it because the Constitution prevents them from total world power. And this is part of what makes America such a powerful country, because most of these New World Order, WHO pandemic treaties and all of that stuff, they cannot move forward until the United States is on board. And the United States doesn't go on board unless you don't have a constitution anymore. And so that's why the Constitution comes under this heavy attack by the corruption, by these criminal syndicate people, whatever you want to call them, is because until they wipe that Constitution out, they can't totally gain power. And so that's part of the big piece in there. So we're going to see a big attack June coming on this, and it makes sense. And then we're only a few months out from the election. We're 5 months out from election time here in the U.S. Once we get through that month, we're talking 4 or 5 months from election time. So it makes sense too, logically, if you just think common sense wise, that could very easily be something that comes under attack at that time. So that does match up for me. I think there's again some strange things that's going to come up in the royal family, and this may be connected to part of why Camilla doesn't automatically inherit the throne. And this comes back to maybe there's somebody else besides Charles there. And there could be something coming out that there is somebody else um, in there. But that being said, she was the somebody else at one point. You know, if we go back and look at some of that, you know, and the whole Diana thing, we could see more things come out around Princess Diana, right? At that time. And and you know, there could be more coming up around that where she did, you know, Charles remarried and remarried her um, after the death of Princess Diana. So there could be a little bit of a twist on that component as opposed to and it could be, I mean, it could be Charles could pass and she's got somebody in the wings and she's ready to do something else and move on to somebody else. And that could be part of the turning over or the passing down on into William and kind of skipping over Andrew in there that we saw last month. Um, you know what, we'll just have to see how it kind of plays out in there. Um, so I think there is going to be something in it that's going to come up, and I can't give you exact specifications on everything, but I can tell you it will connect to Camilla, it will connect to Charles, it will connect to the remarrying after death, which again, that goes back to bringing a resurfacing of Princess Diana's death and what happened and other things that were around it. And, you know, are we going to find out that there was something more sinister there where everybody was looking in one direction around Diana's affair as opposed to looking at what was going on with Camila. So could be some interesting pieces come out there. Or there just could simply be a new royal installed on the throne, a coronation happening at that time. Back in history, this month, this time period, this energy connects back into the Battle of Parliament, the Parliament army and the royal army going on. And that's an interesting thing as well. So are we going to see again something, a division, a battle that is going on between royal security and the country's security, the country's forces? I think there is going to be some interesting stuff. So I think it's going to be a hot spot back there. Also, we'll have things coming up around the Magna Carta, which is also going to be very interesting. You know, of course, this was supposed to be a peace treaty of kings and barons and the development of democracy in England to limit land confiscation and unreasonable taxes. So, you know, here again, that tells me we talked about this in May of land confiscation possibilities and attempts to seize land. And so it would only be natural at this time. This does fit, again, on a logical piece, that aspects around the Magna Carta come up, and that starts to get used to help people protect their land there in England and to protect them from going to these excessive and unreasonable taxes. You know, again, Biden in the US, he wanted to go up to a 43% tax on some stuff here, and that's pretty beyond excessive for people here. That's not what they do. And so I think we're going to start to see maybe some fight back around that, or some people reviving aspects of the Magna Carta saying you can't do this. It's going to get interesting. It's going to get interesting, to say the least. We may also see another thing in history. We had a point that connects into this where there was a renouncing of German names and titles, which, you know, goes with some of the communist movements and things that were surrounding Germany and stuff. And we may see that happening actually. We could see that happening with, again, German names, or anybody who the common names are that are associated with, like, the big banking families, the cartels, the communist structures, you know, what names are common associated with them. And there's a two-edged sword with that, right? One is to get rid of them, and another is to go into hiding. Let's get rid of our names and change our names so they don't know who we are, type of thing. I could also see this happening with the Jews. And of course, if we go back into some of the communist times, you've got the German Jews. And so there could be something with trying to renounce names connected specifically to German Jews in there. So Germany is kind of interesting. I think it's popping up into the spotlight here recently. And this is a time that part of history connects again with a new king of England. So I think definitely, whatever goes down in May, whatever is the result of May's things, we could see a new installation to the throne in there. And who that is going to be, again, I don't know exactly, but if we look at, again, all of the affairs and the sexual accusations and everything like that go with Charles and Andrew and things like that, it very well could be an installation of William coming into the throne at this time. So if he survives the attacks that I saw towards him in May, which I imagine he will, then he could very easily be that. So we'll have to see how that plays out and how that comes around. Now, the other big piece that we have connecting in history during the month of June is landmark buildings being burned. So one of the landmark buildings that was burned that connects through this time was London's Globe Theatre. And I think, well, what is the equivalent like that? I was thinking about this when I was putting my notes together. I said, what's the equivalent to that? And I thought, well, maybe like Radio City Music Hall in New York might be equivalent to that. There might be some venues in San Francisco that would be equivalent to that. Probably something in Chicago that's equivalent to that. Sydney's got a big art and performing music hall theater aspect there. Of course, we saw not long ago, right, the theater in Russia, the big theater, that was a couple of months back. What was that, in March or something? That they had people come in and open fire and start to burn buildings. So again, the corruption, they want to get rid of the landmark buildings. They want to get rid of these things. And so here again, you've got to be really careful if you're going to be out in crowds, if you're going to be in busy places, if you're going to be doing these things. I'm not saying isolate yourself off and don't have any fun. I'm just saying be careful, because these things are a target at this time. That doesn't mean that they're always going to be a target, but they are going to be probably at this time. So we want to think about, what are some of our most landmark buildings, right? What was something else that got attacked? The big cathedral got attacked. The Notre Dame cathedral was attacked. So I think all of these things are going to come kind of under attack. So any big thing, and that makes tourist areas with big landmarks a target. That shows that they're probably going to be not the safest places to be, which is something, if you're planning vacations or anything like that, you may not want to see landmark buildings. You may not want to be in areas where there's landmark buildings, right? Certainly the World Trade Center here, Twin Towers, was a landmark building. Of course, that doesn't connect in particularly for this time, but that is a landmark building. So might be wise just to be aware what are the landmark buildings around where you are, in your region, where you go, where you're planning on being, and use a little caution. Use some caution around that. Okay, moving on. So that kind of covers some of our monthly stuff, because our monthly stuff was all about, for June, was all about the past resurfacing. And again, we want to think about, how do we do things different? How do we look at things differently? How do we understand the truth of what's happening instead of just getting swept up in the drama, the chaos, or anything else that's coming up? And how do we make the choices that we need to make to move forward in that favorable direction and not allow these things to keep repeating themselves over and over again. And that's really the big pieces in there is what choices are we going to make to shift what happens moving forward. We can't erase the past. We can't make the past not be what it's been. But we can make choices that move us in a favorable direction so that we don't have to keep going through pandemics over and over again, so that we don't have to keep going through communist structures over and over again, so that we can actually move forward and create a world that is safer, create a world that is, wonderful to be in and enjoyable to be in. We have a magnificent world. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to enjoy it and to have a decent life, with one full-time job versus, having to work 2 or 3 full-time jobs to have no life. And those are the things we want to think about. We want to learn from these things. History is there to teach us. It's not there to be a nuisance. It's not there to support evils. It's there to teach us so that we can choose different paths, different courses, and make wiser decisions along the way. So from the 1st through the 20th of June, we really want to be making sure that we're taking care of our elders in our communities and our societies. They are going to be probably under particular attack at this time. We want to keep them safe. We want to provide them with dignity. We want to be treating them with respect. Now, certainly, if they're out there and they're a serious, true danger in some way, as in they're a terrorist, that might be a little different story. We might have to take a different approach. But I think one of the things we're going to see is we're going to see a movement back to multi-general houses and households. And that serves a couple of purposes. One, it allows us to care for elderly parents and generations in their own home, in a loving environment, outside of the medical system, if we'd like to be outside of the medical system. It brings more incomes into one household, which is how a lot of people made it, in past times. They had the multi-generational aspects, so they had multiple people bringing incomes into the house, which allowed them to have a house and have something that was their own. And then it allows those who are young and youthful and full of energy and physically in good condition and health and all of that to be able to handle the responsibilities and the chores there. So we can see people moving away from some of the nice services that have been convenient, whether that's childcare or other things, and having the children contribute to the care of the household and contribute and interact with the care of their elders and to help them understand what happens. This is part of the aging process. This is part of what goes on, and building those positive relationships. And of course, the corruption will not like that a whole lot because they want to disperse the family drastically. And part of that is because they don't want grandchildren interacting with their grandparents, because that's how grandchildren learn the truth about our history. The elders are a big part of our history, and they remember a lot of it, and they will pass it down, and those grandchildren will remember it. And that will become so the elderly become a very big influence on the younger or the youthful generation, and they can offer up a lot of solutions and a lot of different understandings about things that those kids are not getting in the school system, that they're not getting from books or searches online or things like that, because they're learning from their grandparents' experiences. And I think that that's a very, very big important thing. We also are going to see, again, this increase in these first 3 weeks in accidents, deaths made to look like accidents. And because we have the elderly influence, the ancestral influence there, I think that we are probably going to see a lot of deaths of older people. This could bring back aspects of deaths in nursing homes, deaths in retirement areas, being greatly increased, especially in those states or countries that believe their elderly to be a nuisance or a threat. in some way. And they're going to say, they're going to write it off. Well, they had multiple health issues or they were 90 years old. You know, didn't matter if they went out and drove and were active and ran in circles around 30-year-olds. You're going to say, oh, it was an accident. Oh, this was an accident, and it won't be, and it will be a sad thing. It will be a sad thing to see. So we really have to be careful of that. We're going to see endings of the past to meet the needs of the future. So here again, there's going to be this sort of trying to obliterate or alleviate the past in order to bring in a desired future. And we have to be careful because those who are trying to so-called herald in a new world, a new future, that's not necessarily to the benefit of most people. Matter of fact, a lot of what they're heralding in does not include humans or humanity. So when we look at that, we have to be very, very careful. And again, that ties in with the component of like shifting of the throne. We could see, we could see people like Soros could pass away, for example, and then his son take over his operations. That could be a component that comes in. So we could see this transitioning from one generation to another generation. And we have to look at it. We have to think how many of these people who are involved in these corrupt syndicates, these networks, these criminal syndicates, are older now. A lot of the big people that made a difference many decades ago that cleaned stuff up. You think of how Rudy Giuliani cleaned stuff up in New York. A lot of them are pretty well up there in age, and even if you look at people like Hillary, and most of these people who have been involved in all of this stuff are up there. And so if we start seeing a huge shift in our elderly population and a huge die-off happening in that population, we're going to see a huge shift in our world just as a natural response. Because you're removing certain energy patterns and certain mindsets are clearing from this dimension, this world. And you have others that are going to take a stronger hold in it. So that will be interesting. And we've got to learn from our past. If we're going to move forward and not repeat things over and over and over again, we've got to learn from the past. And we've got to take the measures that are going to prevent these hardships and these things from happening again. And I think a lot of people think that these things have been resolved. Like when you look at Nuremberg trials or things like that, and they think, well, we've found the resolution and we put this in place so that they won't do it again. But we have to think criminals don't play by the law. You have to think what truly stops them, because some piece of law or legislation isn't going to be it necessarily because they don't care about it and they believe that they're above it. In the 21st through the end of the month, again, the weather issues coming up. So this is a big thing right now. Just we're kind of in this bigger cycle where the weather's coming up at the end of the month, towards the end of the month, every month almost, we're seeing challenges with weather patterns coming through. So just be on top of that, especially you've got a storm in the area, you get into the desert regions, like here in the United States, Arizona, New Mexico, things like that, where southern Utah, they have monsoons that go through. So if you're out in those canyons or things like that, it can be very dangerous with the flash floodings and those sorts of things. So they can turn they can turn harder and more dangerous than expected on a moment. So we just don't want to take chances. And especially because we do know that there's the weather manipulation pieces that are active in a lot of these storms. It's not just 100% nature anymore. That they can turn very quickly and be a lot worse than what's predicted or expected. So just stay on top of that. Again, as I like to say, have your supplies on hand. It's better safe than sorry. It's better to have some backup ready to go. We could also see more tectonic plate manipulation happening at this time. If you're not familiar with that, that is directed weaponry, which is available and has been used in the past to create shifting in the tectonic plates, which then creates earthquakes. So we could, when you combine that with the weather and the time of year and everything, and you start shifting tectonic plates, then you're also going to maybe see more tsunamis or things like that in there. And so a lot of people will buy into weather stuff as 100% God created, whatever. And they are not today. Unfortunately, they are. I'm not saying every storm is manipulated, but we do have a lot of manipulation being used, so we have to be wise to that and realize that this is part of creating chaos and devastation and being able to get control. So we want to have our plans in place. We want to be ready for what's activated. Again, not stand in the fear, not reside in the fear, not be wandering around going, oh my God, our town's going to be wiped out or something. We just want to be ready. We just want to have some frame of mind where we can deal with it. We want to have some resources on hand. We want to understand, how can we get through this? And if you have that laid out before you're in it, you're going to be a lot better off. And again, I believe in the prevention method. If you're prepared and ready to handle it, you probably won't have to deal with it. That's just my philosophy, and I've seen that happen too many times in my life. If I'm prepared to deal with things, I usually don't have to deal with them. It doesn't mean that it never happens, but I'm usually one that comes out a lot better off than a lot of people when they do go down. So with that, we also have aspects that there's going to be places that are centered in God that are going to get targeted. So that's going to be our churches, that's going to be spiritual centers, that's going to be faith-based places. This could be a wake up in our spiritual communities as well, because they think that they've been invincible, but they are not going to be. And the reason they're being targeted is because they are not controllable. Going to see a lot of rebellion energy coming up, freedom protest surfacing at this time, this last, week and a half of June, and attempts to entrap those that are supporting freedom and not conforming. So a lot of this, flipping, this twisting, making what is good appear bad and making what is bad appear good. A lot of that twisting going on in there. So when I see that, I say, watch out. Watch out if you're going to protest, if you're, going to these different things, because when you couple that with death energy that's present, well, that was more in the first part of the month, but still, when you couple that with some of these other things, it's just not a good scenario. You're just setting yourself up for issues when you do it. There's other ways that you can go and speak your mind besides getting in these big cities and these big crowds and scenes that have the propensity to turn dangerous. And this is going to be another thing. We talk about the aspects of the past repeating. This could be a time where we're going to go back and we're going to see these people who are not so nice people, who are supporting the criminal syndicates, that are supporting the corruption, that are supporting these things, call for violence. Now, we saw this a few years back, right? We had several political leaders, governors, senators, whatever, that came out and they were calling for people, their supporters, their activists, whatever you want to say, to go out and physically be violent on other people. So, we could see when we couple that with some of these other things, right? The women's rights, the anti-slavery aspects that are in motion as well. That means that we can actually see calls for violence on women, on, white people. We will probably see these things. And of course, that's probably going to stir up that whole movie that Obama put out, of trying to extinguish the white race. So, that's going to bring in that's probably going to surface, and there'll probably be some connections around that. And that's why we want to be careful, because these are these are twists. And if we get caught reacting, if we get caught in this battle with them in the moment, they're just going to use that against us. So we need to step back, we need to diffuse those emotions, and then we need to say, how do we approach this ethically and lawfully? And approach it from that aspect, from truth and facts. And then when we do that, then we can start to dissolve this, because the truth will dissolve all of it. When the actual truth comes out, not narratives, not skewed or anything like that, that will dissolve the corruption, because people will never choose it. You'll have that handful of people out there, but 98% of the people aren't going to choose it when they actually know what the truth is. So again, we want to be very careful. Again, I think the bigger cities are always the bigger danger in things. That doesn't mean that our rural communities are void of it, but the bigger cities are definitely, the college towns are definitely a huge thing. I noticed that a couple of years ago, just how much, and of course that's been coming out in the news the last couple of months, here at the end of April, all the stuff happening at college campuses with the Palestine movements and stuff like that. So definitely got to be careful on that. Now, as far as actions that we're going to probably see getting taken, again, lots of lies, deception, manipulation. This is from the 1st through the 9th. All of this lies, deception, manipulation. The good side of that is the truth is also coming out during that time. And all these lies and stuff are being used to control people. They're going to come in the form of false promises, false facts from the corruption. That's you see these jokes, but it's true. Let the FBI investigate their own crimes, and then produce the facts on them. I mean, you're never going to get the truth that way, right? So it's very absurd. It's very absurd when we get into some of these layers of it, and they're going to skew things. So we have to be very careful to go in, do our diligence, do our research, and not just accept the facts that we are given at face value and things. So for example, they'll come through and they'll say, oh, look, the inflation is down. We've lowered the inflation so much, it's gone from 9% to 7.5%. But what they're not telling you is that 4 years prior or 5 years prior, it was only 1.5%. So it's actually up 6% and not down. So this is how they distort the truth. On one hand, yes, it's down from their high, but the down point is still way above what it was before. So it actually hasn't come down, it's gone up. And these are the things we have to be careful of, this distortion of facts to make us see things the way they want us to see them versus the way they actually are in there, which is huge. And then from the 10th through the rest of the month, so that whole last 2/3 of the month, the actions that we're going to see coming up is stress and anxiety, and people are really going to be rising, and that can always create a little danger, especially if you have politically charged people, activists, dramatic people that are emotionally unstable, things like that. The stress and the anxiety is going to really amp up during this last 3 weeks of 2 weeks, whatever, June, 3 weeks, I guess, of June. And this is especially going to come because people don't feel like they have control or command over their own life. What they're starting to maybe fall into the fear. They're starting to fall into, instead of saying, okay, this is our opportunity to polish, to refine ourselves, to make some shifts and some changes, they're falling into that space of, I'm helpless, I'm a victim, I'm this sort of thing. And we don't want to go fully into that space. And they're feeling like they're making a lot of sacrifices and things still don't work. So this is very disheartening to the middle class grouping that it really is the backbone of our country, of our economics in pretty much any country. And it's coming from a realization of system collapsing. The system is not sustainable the way we have it. All of the taxes are not sustainable. All of these, a lot of these climate agendas, they're not sustainable. They're not they're not able to maintain themselves. They're not a self-sufficient system. Relying on other countries for our basics is not a sustainable system. So as people start to realize that, I think that's going to be where a lot of the stress is, and there's going to be a lot of how do we make it, how do we get by, um, not sure how to keep the roof over my head type of thing. We'll see more and more people coming into those questions and just feeling that disheartening of I'm giving, I'm giving, I'm doing, I'm working, I'm taking on this, I'm taking on that, and it's still not enough. And we have to be very careful of that mindset because it's very self-defeating. And when people get in that mindset, they start turning over power, they start turning over control of their lives, they start doing all kinds of things out of desperation. And that never leads us in a positive direction when that happens. Also, during this time, lots of tests and lots of temptations. So the stress and this anxiety is actually probably going to come from a lot of these tests and these temptations. So it's just kind of like, it's always easy to reach for the quick fix, instead of like really changing your diet, for example. It's easier to just reach for the candy bar or the pop or something like that, to give you a little bit of energy. But in the long run, that destroys your body and it destroys your system and it destroys your organs' abilities to function well and things like that. And so it never, it's like a junkie's fix. That's what I like to call it. It's like a junkie's fix. You keep going for the fix and you never go for the solution. And so that's kind of where we're at. We're going to see these tests and these temptations come up, and that's going to bring up a rise in addictions. It's going to bring up a rise in using drugs to escape things, to de-stress. We're going to see an increase of probably overdoses during that time, or drug-related deaths of some sort, whether, again, that's car accidents, whether that's fentanyl stuff. We'll probably see fentanyl rise up in the surface, the opioids rise up. There's so many drugs out there now that we certainly didn't have when I was a child here, in my youth, but more and more people relying on that because they want to escape. They don't like the way life feels. And we could see more choosing the deaths, the assisted deaths going on at this time, more food addictions, more sexual addictions going on. So you could see this rise in sexual crimes coming up during this time, happening in there. So we have to be very careful, and we want to center back in and realize these are tests. These are tests. We may feel like breaking down, we may feel like escaping, but what we really need to do is we need to face things from spirit. Because when we go off down the temptations, when we go off down the drugs and the addiction paths and things like that, we're separating from divine presence. We're separating from God. So we're separating from everything that can help us, basically, is what we're doing. And what we want to do is we want to go back to putting our emphasis on values, on quality, on integrity, on truth. Because if we choose that path, if we resist the temptations to take the corrupt paths, and we stay in upholding the truth and the integrity and follow that, then we open up the sustaining happiness. We open up the sustaining joy. We open up the systems that will actually take care of us. So that becomes very, very important. So we're really looking for that true solution. We want to stand by that and be willing to resist the initial temptations, of things. We want to resist those initial bribes, so to say, and do things so that we hold out for what's really worthwhile and really valuable for us, truly valuable. This is a time where we need to give up what is unhealthy. And we need to realize that just because we give up what is unhealthy, that doesn't mean we're in deprivation. Matter of fact, we actually can open a lot of abundance patterns by giving up what's unhealthy, because we make more room for what is enjoyable and truly healthy for us. And when we do that, then that opens up feeling like we have enough, that we are enough, that life is fulfilling. So we transition and transmute it all, which is a really powerful place to be. I think a lot of people during this time frame they're going to be looking, from an action aspect, they're going to start releasing their materialism crutches, because that's what they are. They look to things to affirm their self-worth and value, as opposed to going again more into spirituality, their faith, their religion, whatever, um, their inner self for their value and their worth. And so they're going to start releasing these materialism uh, crutches. So we could see people starting to possibly get rid of second homes. We could start seeing them release some of the excess things that they've been um, having for the last, however many years that they've held on to. And they're going to start getting again back to these things of real value: family time, time with friends, simple things, being out in nature, being more physically active, doing things together, building things on their property, whether that's a garden or taking time for stargazing or whatever it is. They're going to go back to these simpler activities. And as a result, they're going to find true strength in that process. So we want to keep in mind that what is true, what is truly valuable, what is worth having, it doesn't need to tempt us, it doesn't need to coerce us. And we want to keep that in mind when we're being told, that we're being led in a better direction. But if we're really being led in a better direction, we wouldn't have to be bribed into it. We wouldn't have to be tempted into it. Um, and it wouldn't hold us captive. So we want to really consider that when we, think of that in 2020, right? They bribed you with hamburgers, they bribed you with donuts, they bribed you with various things to get you to take certain actions. And, you know, it just, it's a way of holding you captive. It's a way of taking control of you. So, uh, what is true doesn't need to do that, because it shows its value. It radiates its value and you can see it, and you don't need anybody to push you into it, because it's like, yeah, I want that. I want real happiness. I don't want just the 5 minutes of happiness that's then going to drop me off and make me feel like crap for the next 2 months in there. Now, as we get into our thoughts, the mindset where people are going to be, we have a lot of exposure on people's past that were unknown, and closing out the past. So this is the first through the third of the month. So just the first 3 days of it. We could see different things like history lessons coming up that dispel the illusions and the lies, particularly around racism, which is going to be very interesting. So I think that narrative will probably get shut down very quickly early in the month, from the 4th through the rest of the month. Again, we see a lot of turmoil, a lot of drama coming up, a lot of mental warfare going on. So a lot of psychological warfare, a lot of trying to mess with people's heads going on during that time. This could be very upsetting for many people. And I can easily see that this could be used to create a lot of division in people, again, get people battling against each other, because again, you can't conquer people if they're united. You can only conquer them if you've divided them and have them busy arguing with each other, and that keeps them busy while implement other plans. And we see that a lot in the last couple of years. Hold in fear and despair with weather manipulation. So again, a lot of people being in fear: is my home going to be wiped out? Am I going to lose everything? What's going to happen with the storm? Am I going to lose my pets? Am I going to lose family? Am I going to get separate? Using the weather manipulation to create fear in people is going to be a big piece that's going to come out. And what this is really about, it's about traumatizing people. Because if you just start to rebuild and then everything gets wiped out again, and you start to rebuild and everything gets wiped out again, that's about traumatizing people. That's about putting people in financial hardship so that they have no choice but to go onto a government system. And, I have stayed off of the government systems. I've chosen to face some of the hardships as opposed to going on to the systems. But this is a nasty spiral and cycle that really, again, is about grooming people to get used to payments from the government. And I believe that there are things that need to be there for people. But a lot of our systems are not taking care of the people who actually need it, because those people are falling through the cracks in things. And so, I do not believe that we need to unnecessarily be living out the system. It wasn't designed to be a freeloading system, and it's not sustainable. Those systems always end up crashing. So we have to be very, very careful about that. Um, and we're going to probably again see a lot of health challenges coming up uh, in the mind, but it's going to be more mental than physical in the health challenges. So we might see things like dementia come up. We might see things more like more things coming out in people's manifestos, um, terrorist manifestos, and showing the mental instability. So we're probably going to see a lot of stuff coming out saying, oh, please be sympathetic to psychopaths, and please be sympathetic to people with mental disorders. We're probably going to see a big push on that, because that's the type of thing that happens when these energy currents come up. If you have mental health challenges going on, oh, now we need to be compassionate to all these people. They're not telling you that they've been using all of these people, abusing them, disrespecting them, and creating the mental issues that they have to start with. It's not about dealing with anything. It's about just accepting having crazy people around you. And why is this? Because literally we've had the leaders from the other countries tell us, we're dumping people from our insane asylums into your country. And now they want us to be compassionate to those people who are emotionally stable and not safe to have in society. We're not talking about the average person with stress. We're not talking about the average person who isn't coping well or who even has PTSD. But this will aggravate a lot of PTSD in people. And it will be one of the things that they will use. So this is what I would call a disease psyop, to get people fearing illness. So it's more about trying to convince people that something is more than it is. So for example, right, with avian flu stuff and stuff that they put out, and it's like, oh, this is like the deadliest thing of avian flu, and it's going to, wipe out 60% of the people that get it. But there's literally been 1 or 2 cases of it. We're not talking like hundreds of thousands of people. We're literally talking 1 or 2 cases, which has always been. It just hasn't been promoted in the news. There's always been 1 or 2 cases, show up here and there. That has been part of life. So again, they want people to fear these things. So it's really a mental warfare where they're trying to get their minds so much into fear that they actually create it. Because as we know, if our thoughts become consumed with being sick, we will create illness in our bodies. That's part of that interaction between body and mind that happens. And that makes us more vulnerable to catching things. And, again, probably not much of it is going to be real. It's just about getting into people's heads and creating the fear. And then in the soul self energy, we've got a lot of energy coming up that is troubled soul energy, broken spirit energy, discouragement showing up in people. We could see the storms pushing people over the edge. That energy, and that runs throughout the whole month, can create an increase in suicide, particularly people who are not doing well mentally. If they're not doing well mentally and their spirit is broken, that's where we will see the actual true suicides coming in, happening in there, and that just pushes people over the edge. That's when we see the suicide murder cases going on with things. And what we need to do is we need to seek and find the blessings in the turmoil. And when we can do that, that's again when we start to turn the energy around. Like, yeah, it was a devastating storm, but I'm so blessed that, I moved my vehicle that night and so it didn't get trashed, or, whatever it is. We have to look for even the small blessings in the turmoil. And when we do that, then we can start to turn the situation around. We can start to come out of it. We can release any of the trauma that becomes associated with the experience through that. And of course, when we focus on our blessings, we create more blessings. That's, again, part of the way the mind works and how it manifests and creates things. And, when you're thinking about this and you're experiencing it, go back to the old Dr. Seuss um, Christmas movie, The Grinch Who Stole Christmas. And the Who's had everything taken from them, everything wiped out from them, and they came out and they still sang on Christmas morning, you know, and they still sing their songs, and it didn't matter whether they had presents, and it didn't matter whether they had trees, and it didn't matter that. That's the mindset we want to come in. We don't want to let it break us. We don't want to let it stop us from gathering, from connecting, from holding joy in our hearts, because that part is always a choice, um, to be able to see those blessings in there. And we also want to realize that any of the destruction that does happen is going to give us an opportunity, to start new life. But we also want to realize that the destructions are being created to implement new world order systems as well. So we have to be a little bit proactive, I would say, on top of things and aware to actually come around and make sure that the new life that we are creating and the new directions that we are going are operating with foundations of God-centered, of divine source-centered, compassion, of kindness, of safety, of moving us again in these favorable directions, and self-sufficiency, not being in these controlled, dictatorial types of systems in there. So we want to focus on what is practical, what is responsible, um, maintaining our freedom and simpler living. So I think, even when stuff is destroyed, it is an opportunity to simplify, to again get down to those things of real value, separate needs from wants, and realize wants are used to control us, and needs are, where the true values are in there, and redirecting our focus on it, and that will help a lot. A lot of people, again, they're going to be at the precipice, so they're really maximizing. And I love the pieces that have been put out there in the recent couple of months. When the quiet people who just want to be left alone get provoked to take action, you better watch out, because it's all over at that point. And I do love that, and that's the thing about the precipice. You don't want to stir up the quiet people who want to be left alone, because you're not going to make it when you do. And that's going to be a big turning point in some ways. But what we're going to find is, because people are going to bring those ethics and those values and the purpose and the principles and integrity back in as a key focus, which we have in this month, they're going to be seeking justice. They're going to be seeking accountability. They're going to want criminals prosecuted. They're going to want to have people get in and handle what needs to be handled. So you are going to have people at that threshold of being fed up in June, and they're tired of the political games. They're tired of being played on both sides. They're tired of the hypocrisy. And again, we have to realize that, it's not about what party somebody claims. It's about who they are and what they're standing up for. And that's where we have to come back to those values, and who is going to support that, and who's going to honor that, and who isn't. And that's where we can get in and hold accountable. So we don't want that distraction that it's one side or the other, because it isn't truly. People are tired of the hypocrisy, the agendas getting pushed on them. They're tired of all of it. And they're just not going to do it. We're going to see a lot more speaking up, standing up to the injustices coming down here in June. Tired of being asked to sacrifice by those who are living excessively. That's another thing. I think a lot of people out there are like, yeah, if it was truly for the good of the whole, so to say, and it truly was for the benefit of humanity, I think a lot of people would be on board with it. But when it's just narratives, and when you have people that are saying you need to suffer and you need to give everything up, and then they're flying around in private jets, and they're going and bouncing around between, multi-million-dollar homes in multiple places constantly, and they're not abiding by what they're asking the average person to do, that's it. People are tired of it. They're seeing that. They're like, well, why do I have to give everything up when they're doing all of these things and living this luxurious lifestyle? And, they want to give me some petty little stipend that they can control. It's not going to work for people. And they're fed up. And here again, this is going to shift a lot of people away from things that they thought were good that they were supporting, and it's going to move them in a different direction with things. And they won't tolerate being restricted. They won't tolerate having their freedoms and their rights restricted. So we're going to see this big kind of upheaval, probably some big movements coming around in June on this. And the key is, again, that people need to act out of the facts and the truth and ethically and not be in battle. And this is a big thing. We can't be in the reactive space because nothing is going to get accomplished if we're in the reactions just having petty cat fights with people. Okay? You got to get in and you got to do it legally. You got to do it lawfully. It's got to be ethical. And you've got to diffuse the reaction and the high emotional charge and take the action. So you can say all the things you want. You can feel, I don't agree with this. I don't like it. But until you get in there and you say, I'm not going to patronize a business that is abusive to me every time I walk into it, or I am going to patronize the place that is very patient and tolerant with me, and I'm going to respect them and support them. So here again, this is going to shift our economy. It's going to shift a lot of things. It doesn't do me any good to just sit there and yell at the people who are being abusive to me. That's not going to go anywhere because they don't really care. But when I take my business someplace else, when I go in and I actually file a lawful complaint of being harassed or whatever else, whatever the case is in the situation, then then something's being done in there. So we have to, again, stay focused on that action and not that reaction in there. So there you go. That's everything that's happening in June. And yeah, a lot of things going down. A lot of we got a lot of stuff coming up, bubbling to the surface. So, be safe in there. Be ready for what is getting activated. And know where your place is in it. Know what you can do. And understand what these components are about, because it does make a difference. If you just get hit by a storm and you don't know what's happened and you didn't even know a storm was coming in and everything's devastated, it's very easy to fall into the trauma. But if you have that awareness, okay, storms are more probable, they could be more dangerous. I need to have some backup supplies on hand. I need to be able to deal with certain conditions if power goes down or water can't be used, or, what do I do with that? And when ready for that, then it's doable, it's workable. You could say, yeah, the situation still sucks, but I'm not mentally and emotionally devastated by it. I can actually get in there and I can say, great, well, I can't go to work, so let's see what we can do around the neighborhood. Let's see how we can help each other out. Let's see, who needs what, and let's make that happen. I feel very blessed that even though, there's plenty of people who may not share my political views or my ways of doing things, I feel very blessed to be in a community where people will step up and help each other with their needs in many ways. So those are the things, and that's another thing, build your relationships with your neighbors if you can. You may not agree with them on everything, but in times of need, in times of turmoil, it really helps to have some decent connections with them if you can have it. Even if you're casual and superficial most of the time, just those little pieces of helping hands, just helping each other out when times do get a bit rougher makes a huge difference. And that's what built communities in the past. That's what our strong ancestral and historical energy was built on, was the whole community showed up. If somebody had to go do something, somebody was able to watch their kids. Somebody did take care of their place while they were gone. It's all there. It's all there and it's all workable, but we've got to take those steps to make it happen. And it starts right in your own backyard and right in your own life. So take care, everybody. Remember to like, subscribe, all the good stuff that says, hey, I appreciate you getting this information out. Check out the links in there. Again, the book, The Code Journey, you want to check it out, get your copy. We're only 4 months into the year, so there's still plenty of the year there. You can hop over to my website, compassioncodes.com, go to the Goods tab, look at the Code Journey, and there's direct links to get you right into the purchasing pages for both um, the paperback and for the ebook version there. I have study sessions twice a month around the full moon and the new moon time periods. And we meet online. They're recorded, so you can always get the recording if you're not on the live calls. And those are just a great time to come in and ask questions. And we talk about everything. We talk about things that are happening in our world. We talk about agendas that are going down. We talk about God. We talk about all kinds of things, processes, personal experiences. We never know where the conversation is going to go, and that makes it pretty interesting and pretty wonderful at the same time. So take care, and I hope you all have a wonderful month. Hang in there. It's kind of hard to say that sometimes when when you know what's coming down the pike. I hope you find your flow and your strength and your blessings in whatever happens in your month. And I will catch you in the next month. Take care.